back. Yeah. So, I'd love to invite my panelists on here. No mai haere mai. Yeah, that's right. Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te ka tangi hoki a hau. Tohu Māori Ora. No mai haere mai to this session about aligning Mātauranga Māori. I have some amazing panelists here today, so ngā mihi ki a korua for your mahi in this space and for sharing your knowledge here. Today we have Tyrone Newson, CEO of Ngāti Awa Group Holdings. Mr. Newson is a chartered professional engineer, a civil engineer, I think, and whose recent roles include director at Te Kuaka, which provides project management and engineering services as a development manager at Kiwi Property. Previously, Mr. Newson was based in Singapore and then in Malaysia, taking on roles with international companies. He was the chief executive and then a board member for Te Puna Topu o Hokianga Trust. So up north, isn't it? Yep. So wonderful, thank you. And we've also got the amazing Jade Kake, founder and director of Matakohe Architecture and Urbanism. Jade Kake is an architectural designer and writer. Ki te taha o tōna māma no Ngāpuhi, te whakatohia me Ngāti whakaue ia. On her father's side, of Dutch descent, so lovely mix there. She's also a part-time lecturer at Huri Te Ao, the School of Future Environments at AUT. So please give a warm applause for them to welcome them here. So the purpose of this panel today is really to shine some light on a really special credit within Green Star Buildings. Green Star Buildings is a tool that was launched last night. You've heard a lot about it today. And we've come a long way towards this credit, te Tohu Māori Ora credit. NZGBC brought together a bunch of really brilliant Māori practitioners to work on this credit and formed the Māori Technical Working Group. And so it was all about how do we align Mātauranga Māori and work with Māori within the framework of Green Star. So the Māori Technical Working Group had multiple hui talking about how te ao Māori could work in that tool. Obviously the tool comes from Australia, from Jorge land, and we've adapted that here. Most of the credits could be adapted from the form that they took and put some New Zealand context into it. For this credit and the credit that exists in the Australian tool, the Indigenous Inclusion credit, we thought actually we might have to work back from first principles to get to a certain place because New Zealand's just moved on from that. We can be proud of Aotearoa for that and how we can then utilise that within the work that we do. So that resulted in the Tohu Māori Ora credit, and the first question I have for the panellists is, what is the Tohu Māori Ora credit to you? Oh, there's one here. Oh.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, actually, can I answer differently?
Of course, yes.
Because something that I wanted to reference is that the previous speaker and a few other people have said it as well, wow, I'm amazed how far progressed things are in Aotearoa in terms of relationships with your Indigenous people and the recognition of culture and the value of language. And we often hear that from Australia. But actually, almost conversely, the reason that we're seeing some really incredible innovations here is because they've come from Australia. And just to unpack that a little bit and to use two examples really quickly, so a lot of our regulatory systems and standards, we tend to just adopt from Australia because we have a small market. We don't have the resources to kind of build our own from scratch. One example, of course, is the Green Star tool, because, of course, we don't necessarily have the resources to reinvent ours from scratch. And, why not share the resources we have with our near neighbours? And, there's a lot of merit to that. And actually, for most, correct me if I'm wrong, most of the credits there's pretty reasonable transferability. And this
Absolutely.
one was probably the outlier in that we couldn't just, wholesale adopt it in Aotearoa. It wouldn't be appropriate for our context, and we, as Bobby said, we had to go back to first principles. The other relevant example, and any architects in the room should be familiar with this, is that our competency standards for architects come from Australia. We normally just wholesale adopt them, and we could, in theory, develop our own. The reason we don't is because it ties in with a whole bunch of MOUs that recognise our registration in other countries, and it would just make things really tricky for us if we tried to invent from scratch. And we just don't have the pool of architects or the architecture industry to justify that kind of approach. And so for the first time with the 2021 competency standards, coming from Australia, they included competencies around working with Indigenous communities and Indigenous cultural concepts. And so for the very first time, our Registered Architects Board have had to grapple with how we contextualise those instead of just adopting the Australian standards. And so the NZRAB, which is the Registered Architects Board, is now undergoing a process to develop an addendum that appropriately contextualises those much in the same way we've worked on the Tohu Māori Ora. And so that's created, again, it's a good challenge to have, but the change in Australia has triggered the change here. And fortunately, we're maybe a bit more progressive in our thinking, or as people keep saying, so we've been quite receptive. And we've gone, wow, what a great challenge, let's rise to it. And it's driving some positive change. And I'm sure there are many other areas within various industries represented here, but those are the two that I'm kind of most familiar with. So I just wanted to touch on that connection between Australia and Aotearoa and what's driving some of this change. So that's where it's come from. We probably wouldn't have arrived at it independently because, again, we have a small market and it's quite hard to independently do things from Australia. We kind of walk hand in hand, and they're the, tuakana, I guess, in that regulatory space. Got a bigger economy and it got more influence. But once it landed on our shores and we knew we had to do something, I think we were at a point socially and within our industry where, we've had quite a bit of experience with these approaches, with working with, mana whenua, either as developers or collaborating with developers on projects, seeing our identity inscribed in the built environment. We've seen a lot of this. It's not unusual to our industry. And so I guess, what does it mean to me, which is actually answering the question now that I've got out my points. I think it's really an opportunity to acknowledge those that are already doing this, that already have enduring relationships with mana whenua or are mana whenua as developers. So this should be an easy one for you if you're already in that space. And if you're not, my hope is that this will make those relationships visible, and those positive examples visible, so that if it's new to you, you go, oh, actually, I can do that too. Yeah. And it's going to get great outcomes. Okay, that's enough from me. I think I've used like half our time.
No, that's wonderful. Thanks for that horopaki, Jade, because that's exactly it. This whole session is really around, there's this new credit, this fresh new credit that we can be really proud of in Green Star buildings. Go out and use it. Be brave. There's a whakatauki, kia kaha, kia maia, kia manawa nui. Be brave, be steadfast. And I think Jorge had an example of a building that used the Indigenous inclusion credit and managed to see a whole lot of benefit come out of that all the other things just slot into place because they engaged with the community first, and that was really important. Tyrone, would you like to add, what are your thoughts on the credit?
Kia ora tātou.
Okay.
Te mea tuatai, mihi nui ki a koe Bobby. Nā mai haramai ki te mihi o tātou. Mihi nui hoki ki a Brad. Mō te rei koe. Nō miti hoki a ngā hau. And I just want to add to what Jade said. From a perspective from engineering, engineers are quite good at content. I think this is a great chance for engineering.
Might just need to change the mic out, because, yeah.
Maybe is this better? Yes.
Oh, that's better. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I led you astray. I was like, it must be working. We just can't tell here.
Yeah. I think this is a great chance to reimagine the context in which we apply the Green Star rating. And one of the greatest, I think, achievements that we've done with this credit is, although the structure that it sits within was already predetermined, how the credit is compiled and how that's measured was totally left up to us, the Māori Technical Working Group. And for me, that is quite a big achievement, because usually we do try and align it to something else, some other reference point, try and say that it's something like such and such or something like a different standard. But no, we've managed to have the opportunity, and I think it's quite a special credit for a whole number of reasons, which we'll cover later on. But yeah, that's my first point. Kia ora.
Wonderful. No, that's great. And also that to say that the Māori Technical Working Group wasn't just working on this credit. The members of that group also gave a lot of feedback for the other credits. I think, Jade, you were involved in a lot of the other credits, which kind of inspired us to do better in a lot of those aspects too, and give it a bit of an Aotearoa spin. So it was just really great. And social sustainability being such a huge topic of conversation at the moment. One of the things that came up early on during the development process was the Tyrone design principles and whether or not those were appropriate for the time. So maybe just a bit of a kōrero around that.
Yeah, unfortunately I'm going to give you more of a history lesson, but you're all listening to me, so it's okay. So Tyrone strategy actually came out, a charge led by Māori design professionals in around 2006, and it was a vigorous response to the urban design protocols, which we all agreed were really woefully inadequate and didn't actually touch on culture at all. And so out of that further came Tyrone design principles and methodology as really an attempt to make the translation of Māori cultural values and knowledge into the built environment, trying to make that tangible, because there'd been previous attempts to do so, but they often focused on more metaphysical concerns that were quite difficult for non-Māori attempting to undertake development processes in whatever role that they had to engage with. And so that was really the intention. And it's really a framework, a methodology, and it was developed by Mana Whenua of Tāmaki in collaboration with Māori designers, including Gro Hoskins, who was, I would say, one of the principal authors of those principles. But really, they've been misused a little bit in that sometimes they've been seen as a checkbox, like, okay, I've achieved that, I've achieved that, I've achieved that. And then when you say, okay, but have you done the very first principle, which is mana, and actually formed a relationship with Mana Whenua, and they're like, oh, well, no, not yet. We tried to email them and I think they weren't interested. They didn't get back to us. So we had to go, which is really not the way to do it. But there's development pressures. People are under pressures in their own time frames, often haven't allowed adequate time frames for that relationship to develop. And then suddenly the council is requiring that they also engage with this idea of Tyrone principles. And sometimes the response was to treat it like a checkbox and have it go yourself, which kind of undermines the basic premise of the principles and the methodology. Which is all to say, I think it's been a really useful and important thing in Tāmaki Makaurau. I was involved in some efforts around 2013 to integrate Te Aranga into Auckland Council policy and processes, and I think that's been quite successful. What I am hearing from Mana Whenua of Tāmaki is that they've kind of moved on in terms of both their collective and individual thinking. And so I think because that was quite early on in this process of Mana Whenua being engaged in projects in this city, I mean, they've kind of figured out what works for them and how they want to approach it. So it doesn't have to be Te Aranga, but actually a lot of the things that we see would fit broadly under Te Aranga as a methodology. So when it came to this credit, I was reluctant to prescribe the use of Te Aranga principles, mostly because that very idea of prescribing can mean that people bring their own narrow definition of what it means to the work, unfortunately. Whereas I think leaving it for the various Mana Whenua groups to define is probably a safer position. And some will have their own frameworks and approaches that have a different name. Yeah. And that's all fine. So I think it's really helpful in terms of guidance, because there are some fabulous examples of where Te Aranga principles and methodology have been utilised on projects, but not to prescribe that Mana Whenua who might have their own system, principles, approach, have to use this one because Green Star said so, the developer said. It's the last thing we'd want. So we're just really careful around that.
Yeah, and it's definitely helped shift the dial in terms of what practice looks like in terms of that. with this, let's talk a bit about how we got to where the credit got to, which is the first main principle, which is those long-lasting, enduring relationships. So yeah, how did we go about it? And well, other than me scribbling on a whiteboard like a massive mind map.
That was one of the key points as to where do you start, and one of the things that we all agreed on was as early as possible, basically at concept, because that is the best time to incorporate any other feedback. As you get towards developed or detailed, it gets more expensive to try and incorporate any other feedback on that. But more importantly, it was a sign of genuine intent when you do engage that early, and that's well received by mana whenua on most occasions. So that's one of the key things that we thought of, and that's the reasons why we're reluctant just to adopt wholesale anything like Aotearoa design principles.
And that there was also some commonality from between the framework of Green Star and how the credits of this future focus tool might align with things that are of interest to iwi Māori. So, Jorge was talking about like how it suddenly opened up the conversation around nature. Well, nature's a built-in credit into Green Star buildings.
Yeah, that was actually, I really enjoyed that previous presentation, and that was a really, or was it the previous one or the one? Oh, no, it was earlier. Anyway, the thing you just mentioned. Because I think that like it's quite an interesting example to say, well, if you think holistically and from the perspective of mana whenua or Indigenous people in Australia, generally there's really huge alignment in terms of sustainability. It's just the tirohanga or the worldview might be different, the thinking's very holistic, but the alignment is there. Then you might call it different things. And so if you can kind of adjust the language and adjust the approach so that it is more expansive and aligns better with the worldview of tangata whenua, whether it's here or in Australia, then I think that can only improve the approach. I mean, I'm not saying anything new. There's been so much dialogue around sustainability, Mātauranga Māori, where does it intersect? But I mean, I think we've really got to take these things seriously. And so it was great to have the opportunity to not only look narrowly at one credit, however important it might be, but to look across and to really understand and enhance those connections.
Yeah, and it's not just about intersections now, is it? It's whiria te taura here tangata, it's binding us all together into one, which is kind of really important. And to say that, that was a lovely community project. It's not only community projects which are interested in this. On our technical working group, there's someone who works for an iwi organisation who does commercial and industrial buildings. This is a sort of thing where it has an impact on communities. So any kind of key points you want to draw out from this credit on how people might use it?
So just drawing a bit further, so not just around design, but even like ecological outcomes. For some iwi, that's just as important as the form and function of a building. So it could be enhancement around those areas. And one of the other key features of the way the credit's designed is that through early engagement, the mana whenua can let you know what the items or areas of interest which are of most significance to them. So there is, for coastal iwi, maybe different from ones that are inland, ones urban as opposed to rural. And so it really does give the flexibility to adapt what the importance levels are. So it's not just about design principles, it's also the importance levels and the significance of each of these issues.
And it empowers them to kind of set the agenda with those items too,
Yeah, the other thing I want to add, which is important about this credit, is that anything you integrate, whether it's kind of, priorities or aspirations of mana whenua, Mātauranga, pūrākau, things that ground, a sense of place, tikanga Māori being able to be enacted, te mea, it could be any of those things. It's all fine, but you have to demonstrate that it's to the satisfaction of mana whenua, and they're the ones that verify it. So there's actually no kind of fudging it and saying, well, we had to go ourselves and this is what we think their priorities are, so, tell us we did a good job. It's like, well, that's all fine, but unless they, endorse the work that you've done, you won't get the credit. And if you've genuinely engaged in a process and had a collaborative relationship, that will be very easy. They'll be really excited and positive about providing this endorsement. But if you haven't done it appropriately and you've treated them as a tick box, you're not getting the letter, so.
Yeah, that's right.
Or the credit.
Okay, well, I think we've got time for one final question from the Q&A, which is a really good one. Some iwi, for various reasons, may not be as well resourced as others to consult. Smaller or lack of funds, maybe they haven't, had their treaty settlement sorted. Any advice on how to best support these smaller and under-resourced partners when going through this process?
I'll go first, but I'll go quick. Just pay them. It's probably that simple. So, they won't have money to engage as a development partner, but that shouldn't diminish the sense of partnership within the project. And I come from an iwi and my hapu who are pre-settlement, and we engage on lots of projects around whāngarei. And really what it means is they have to pay our kaumata when they have to pay me. And then we'll work with them and we'll have a great collaborative working relationship. We'll get really fantastic outcomes. But, we don't have an organisation, we don't have resources, but we do care about what happens in our town and we want to be positively involved in shaping that future.
For sure. Tyrone, anything to add there?
No, nothing further. I just tautoko that approach. I think the main thing is as long as you do attempt and try and engage early, like I said, you're usually quite well received.
Yeah, and it takes two to dance around this sort of thing and actually engage meaningfully with each other. So hopefully that gave you some ideas for projects that you might work on. For example, government projects who might build a Green Star, government do need to be engaging with Māori. It's a part of their agenda and built into what they need to do. Well, here's a way to meaningfully engage. So let's give this new credit a go and let's thank our amazing panellists.
I've just got one question I'd love to ask you guys. Is it okay?
Oh, sure.
Yeah? Ngā mihi nui kia koutou e hoa mā for your time, the important perspectives that you shared with us and for the mahi that you both do. Tēnā kouroa. We look forward to learning more from you into the future. A couple of my quick little reflections as I was listening and taking notes is, Tyrone, what you said about how Te Tohu Māori Ora credit gives the Green Star ratings the opportunities to reimagine itself for an Aotearoa sort of context. I found that really powerful. And then Jade, work in partnership with mana whenua and Māori designers and engage in the process sort of from a place of humility, and perhaps we can uncover new opportunities together. So my question for you guys is, can you tell me about a time, whether if it's a kaupapa that iwi or mana whenua have done themselves, or whether if it's a partnership approach, can you tell me about a project or a story where you've seen it done really well, that you've remembered yourself?
Yeah, I do. And I'm so sorry, it's not a Green Star project, but I will still. Actually, before I answer, I was thinking though, and maybe the Green NZ GBC team might have some guidance around this. It's quite tricky when you just work on kind of small scale commercial projects, and if you're, how do you just communicate to your clients, and how can they kind of justify the expense of certification? Because a lot of them, it all really resonates, but then they think, oh, it's too much of a barrier, it's going to be too hard. And I'd love to be able to tell them it's not and actually be able to back that up. And I don't feel like I'm there yet. And we mostly work with clients on smaller scale commercial projects. And I think it would be great. And I know the tool can do it, but how do we kind of make the case so that they kind of enthusiastically jump at the opportunity? Anyway, I won't ask you to answer that now, but just a bit of food for thought. Cool. Okay, so my answer. So we had a project open about 2 weeks ago, and it was a office fit out for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, located in what was, I guess it's still called that, formerly known as Dairy House. It's in Morningside in Whangarei. It's opposite Whangarei Tiringa Parawa Marae. It had been fully refurbished, and then the developer kind of was letting out these base builds to commercial tenants. And this is the last one to be filled, but some of the other tenants are like Becca's in there. I think there's an accounting firm. The gym's in there, which I go to that gym. Anyway, it's been a really successful development. But that one was a real privilege for us because for my small practice, this was the very first time that we had the dual role of being the sole architect all the way from start to finish, as well as leading the cultural design integration and working with our kaumātua and our artists. Usually it's either we're just, no, I shouldn't say just the architect, but we're the sole architect, but it's on a project that's, you know, like a marae or papakainga, and there's not that same opportunity to really deep dive with cultural design integration as there is in, say, a more public project, or there's just no money. Or we've been invited by our hapu to collaborate with usually a bigger company on a really large scale project. And some of those are like, we did Te Iwitahi, the civic centre in Whangarei, we worked on Boys High, we worked on project of the hospital. Anyway, this isn't just to be like a here's what we've worked on, but those are big projects that a small firm couldn't possibly lead. So we're collaborating, but with like the cultural design partner, and there's, you know, inequities in that relationship, and sometimes we've gotten really great outcomes, but I really wanted to demonstrate that actually this is just how we should be doing architecture. And so it was really cool that we got to play both of those roles, and I think we got a really fantastic design outcome. And I'm hoping that MBIE has formed an enduring relationship with my hapu, and that will continue well on into the future. It's looking good right now, but I mean, it's only just opened. So yeah, I mean, that felt really good, but it was a unique opportunity to play both roles and show that we could do it.
Yeah, beautiful. There's like a lot of, hey, can you come Māorify my space there, where most of it's kind of being done as a huge lost opportunity. Matua, have you got a story yourself, I wonder? No pressure.
Kia ora. No, I do have a story. It was when I was at Kiwi Property, and we were renaming some of the internal streets at Sylvia Park. So there's 3 or 4 iwi that we consult with, and it's just a good example of how the Tohu Māori Ora credit would work. So one iwi did not want their tupuna names up on the street names. And the other one said, great, we'll put all ours across there. But both iwi were happy with that. And the reason why I chose that is because one places a different level of significance to it, and the other clearly has a different approach.
Awesome.
And I just learnt so much about that, because you think, oh, should I split it between 2 or between 4? But if you didn't come with a preemptive view, you just allowed the process, and it actually worked out. Right. So I think that's just this small example of genuine engagement, allowing and trusting the process, and then the outcome can still be quite amazing. So that's on working with a number of iwi, and then the other part was, as part of them allocating a street name to one of their tupuna, we actually provided some great collateral for them. They actually did a narrative explaining the meanings behind that name. And the people who did the kōrero for it were actually descended from some of them.
Oh, wow.
And so it meant a lot more to them than just a street name. It was actually bringing their ancestral connection to that area.
Beautiful.
So, yeah, those are my 2 examples.
Tēnā koe, Thank you so much for all your time.
Tēnā korua. Thanks, everyone.